Hey, here's the host.
Hi, Michael's audio is on now.
Okay. I think we can start the meeting now. Thanks, everyone. So, again, please write down your name on the meeting note. First of all, the preparation for KubeCon. I think I just received Michael's invitation for the article. We're somewhat past the deadline, but I think I could put something up before the end of the week and send it out to CNCF, see if it's still possible for the PR to publish.
Apologies for that. I'd forgotten that Kyle had pinged me about that after the meeting last week.
Yeah,
That's
no problem. No problem. Yeah. So the session planning last week, we have confirmation from the SAFE working group about the introduction session. So I think for the introduction session on May 2nd, this should be settled. So for the deep dive session on the next day, I was thinking about like lightning talks, maybe 5 minutes per topic. I remember we have like 35 minutes session, so I think we could allocate like to like no more than 7 specific topics. So I think we already have team volunteer for the SIG auth, OPA. Torin, would you like to do a lightning talk?
Yeah, I can definitely give an update, I guess, on where like what's happening with OPA.
Cool.
That'd be useful. We've got other OPA sessions. Probably gonna do a little update in the safe session. So if you need like if there are other people that would rather that it would be more valuable for them to present, then feel free to bump OPA. But I'm always happy to give an update.
Yeah, definitely. For the Cube arbitrator, Michael, do you think Khalid could do an update, or are you familiar?
Khalid would be a good person for it. I don't think he's going to be able to attend Copenhagen. I can cover that in his place, though. I'll catch up with him to make sure I've got all the right materials.
Okay, I will just put you down. Michael and SIG architecture, maybe. I think maybe Tim could also cover the SIG architecture since he's. So Istio or Envoy, do we know any people that I should reach out to?
So if we want to bring someone for Istio and Envoy, I can definitely reach out to someone from our side. We've got a lot of people that are active there, so I can get you a name for that. In this context, so we're basically saying the intro is going to be more of a standard structured information lecture style Q&A. For the deep dive, we're going to organize it as a series of short lightning talks. And in the case of Istio Envoy, we're looking for
policy related.
For what exactly? So, but in terms of teaching what policy is there or highlighting the gaps that are available that are currently known?
Yeah, I think it's like all the major development regarding policy, like on the mixer side or on the proxy side, and some possible gaps, for future work. Yeah, something like that.
Okay. And the material that Yisu had prepared and the discussions we've had around things like the GDPR and the capacity-driven policy, are we going to cover that in the deep dive session as well? Or are we just going to discuss those scenarios in the intro session?
I'm open to that. So as long as we could cover it in 5 minutes or a little bit more, then you should be fine.
I guess I'm really just kind of asking a question more so than making a suggestion. It was the decision last week that the topic that we've been preparing in the design document will cover primarily in the intro, or that we would cover some of those in the deep dive as well.
I think that'll be intro. because for the introduction
Okay.
session, we got most of the time. So we could,
Okay.
yeah. And Spiffy, anyone knows who to reach out for Spiffy? For workload, security API. Okay, let's just.
I don't know. We could, I guess, reach out to Joe Beta. That's the only person I.
So I can ping Evan, who's like one of the maintainers, or I can ping the Sitel folks that
Okay,
that would be better.
Okay. Put on Torrent for that. Cool. So yeah, if there's like time left, I think Yisui mentioned he was working on the security profile.
Yeah.
You could come up with the POC. Yeah, then that'll be great to demo during the deep dive session. Okay, great. Moving on. First on the list, Erica, take us away about the discussion with Yasin last week.
Yeah, sure. I think there's a lot of discussion. Basically, the scheduling policy is kind of a POC of what that would be, is trying to move forward on a tight timeline, probably not 111, but 112. Well, at the same time, we're kind of trying to be very conscious about the parts of the policy so that it can work as an interface or plug in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking very explicitly about like what the kind of wording that gets used, sort of standardizing things like what binding modes are, where conflicts are handled and when, which kinds of conflicts should be handled at policy creation versus just making a decision later. Let's see. RBAC versus kind of namespace based control. This will probably go with namespacing. Things like that. Defaults are still a weird area. Maybe have separate sort of binding modes for that. How monolithic policy should be. So there's a lot of different details. I think we're hoping to have sort of some proof of concepts of the scheduling, plugging kind of the scheduler in to, or perhaps different, kind of investigate what it would look like if it integrated with OPA or with other, with like Kratos or some other kind of policy things out there. And I can keep you updated when we actually have something there.
So what would be the MVP goals he's or the SIG architecture expect?
I'm not
like a couple of weeks ago about
Oh, what like SIG architecture? I did not go today. Last time it seemed like, yeah, it sounds like a good idea to start thinking about this kind of stuff. I don't know that was a lot of guidance.
Okay, so I remember like last time we discussed this, Tim mentioned that it would be great for the policy working group to provide some recommendation on like how to unify the policy that defined in the scheduling policy proposal. So is
so
that like still the okay?
Yes, but I think using the scheduling policy as the way to explore the concepts rather than trying to come up with the concepts and then putting the scheduling policy into that, I think is the expectation.
Yeah, that was my recommendation, to kind of work off use the scheduling policy as kind of the guinea pig to like have a real concrete base for thinking about these things, but to kind of like at the same time have the big picture in mind. And then once we've figured out the best way of kind of designing the scheduling policy, then kind of take a step back and think about how those same design decisions could be applied to other policy objects in the cluster.
So I was going to say, like, for instance, if the kinds of modes of how the policies work, what are they, compose together using these kind of binding modes, if it seems to work well for scheduling, that can be used in other policies as well.
Yeah, so I mean, shall we set the scheduling policy like part of a routine discussion for the working group? Maybe if we could use that as a straw man for our architecture discussion, right?
Yes.
Then we might as well just, okay.
I think one of the big unsolved questions is how much policies we want to put into Kubernetes proper, as opposed to delegating to kind of third-party plugins, and sort of what the desired end state is of, do we want to say, okay, let's have scheduling policy, metadata policy, pod security policy, and that's it for like dealing with the pod. I know there's a proposal that was brought up, I think last week, around data policy. Network policy is sort of a separate category of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe some policy explicitly on like regarding the external resources that used by the pod could go to like third party something. But like pod security, all that stuff should go into the proper. Maybe like that kind of demarcation, right? We are looking for. Okay. Great.
I did like, I forget, in scheduling today, it came up of, thinking about like your pod spec is what the developer is intentions. This is what they are trying to do. And they say, I would like this. And policy as kind of the administrator's declaration of their intent for the cluster. Kind of liked thinking about it like that. Anyway.
Okay, so let's just as a some sort of conclusion, let's put scheduling policy as like part of our weekly meetings main agenda. So we use it as a straw man for the architecture discussion, anyways, for the design document. That'd be great, I think. Okay, any other issue on this topic?
By the way, it would be great if I could get Erica's email address, because I'm doing a talk on multi-tenancy at the for the regular sessions, and I'd love to say something about scheduling policy briefly, just to kind of promote the fact that this work is going on. But I'd like to get her perspective on what might be useful to say. Erica, would you mind giving me your email address?
Sure. I'll message it here.
Okay, yeah, you can put it in the chat. That'd be great. And then while I'm talking, the other thing I wanted to say was it wasn't clear to me whether you guys said you were going to do something related to security profiles in either the deep dive or the overview session. But Yisui is not going to be able to attend, but I will be, and so I can talk about it. I don't know if there'll be a demo or not. It would be great if there is, but either way, I can. I'll be at KubeCon, and I can talk about that at whichever session you think is appropriate.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. So let me just get it here. Fantastic. Okay, moving on. Today we have a new discussion on the service topology. So I mentioned the design document proposed by Tim Hutchins, and today we have the author of the PR, actually, Jundu, here, who walk us through some of the specificities, I hope. So let me stop my sharing. So Jundu, could you share the screen yourself?
Sorry, Jivan, I'm using my microphone. I'm using my phone, so I can't share my screen.
Okay. Then just let me share. But you can see the screen, right?
Yeah, I can see the screen. And
okay,
I would
so,
like to. Okay.
Okay, let me open the PR and you can talk us through that.
Okay.
Yeah, give us a little bit about the background and then the current status, since I see there's like 94 conversations, so this must be a hot topic.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I'm Jundu from Huawei Pass, and the background is it's a pinpoint for multiple zone cluster deployment since closed zone network traffic being charged, while in zone is not. In addition, closed node traffic may carry sensitive metadata from other node. Therefore, users always prefer the service backends that are close to them. For example, same zone, RIC, host, and so on, for security, performance, and cost concerns. However, Kubernetes scheduler can only constrain a pod to only be able to run on particular nodes or particular nodes or zones. But the Kubernetes service proxy, the kube proxy, just randomly picks an available backend for service routing, and this one can be very far from the user. So, many users, many customers want a topology-aware service routing solution in Kubernetes. They want Kubernetes natively support this feature. Someone may ask why you don't put this feature into the Istio or something like or something. Because firstly, Istio that has no concepts about this topology, and secondly, some self-hosted cluster doesn't install Istio. So we want a native Kubernetes native solution, and the straw man is that we define is that we create a new resource. For example, the service policy, just like the network policy, and the cluster administrator can configure what services are local and what topological they prefer via service policy. And for service policy is namespace scope, and it's optional. It's strict. It's optional. We can configure policy other than topological reference in service policy. So I'm presenting this basic idea for recommendations, because I have already presented this idea in SIG network and SIG architecture, but they haven't decided if this feature should be in SIG network or in other SIG. For example, the policy. They say why you don't present it in SIG policy working group, since policy working group are considering put so many policies into how to say, into so do you have any recommendations about this feature? Sure. Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think
yeah.
we're all just thinking.
I think we're all just parsing out what you've just communicated.
So, David, I see you part of the reviewer. Could you maybe give a little more information about the discussion around the PR?
No, me. I have not looked at this in like 2 months, so I apologize,
Okay,
but I don't have anything useful to contribute right now. I'll definitely take a look at it again. But yeah, I made some comments on it when it was originally submitted, but then I haven't looked at it recently. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
So maybe naive questions, right? What is it about this version of topology-aware routing that would interact, whether it be, or is this an Istio proposal that's in the context of wanting to get feedback from this working group, or is this something that's more fundamental? Because thoughts on Ingress, service topology, et cetera, I see the Istio topic there. Is this meant to be something specific to Istio, though?
Yeah, someone has always said, yes, this is a good question, and it's a very common question. But firstly, Istio has no, doesn't support topology. And secondly, because, for example, self-host cluster want a native support solution in Kubernetes, because many customers don't want to install Istio.
So the examples that you're giving are about kind of resource topology, how the nodes are laid out into rack zones and so on, right?
Yeah.
I see kind of the notion of topology also required in when you're doing placement. So I'm wondering if there's not only for service routing, but for placement of pods and workloads to follow a similar topology model. I'm just kind of throwing that out there.
Yeah, but
resource topology kind of a general thing that is cross-cutting across different domains.
Yeah, topology is a bigger issue that cross multiple working area. For example, scheduling, and I think scheduling has done good work. For example, node affinity and pod affinity, and the volume has started as a local work. For example, so there's a proposal about the local volume, and but because the service is some how to say, is complicated, and but it's a real I think it's a real feature and a stronger feature, because for example closed zone traffic and the closed node traffic. For example, people want to visit the daemon site. They don't want to. They want the traffic closed node, so and so on.
So this is just kind of assuming that you have your pods laid out already somehow, right? However they got there, and you're trying to select a network route that minimizes the traffic from kind of the Istio type of layer.
Istio. Yeah. The requirement is that Kubernetes scheduler can do the topology aware placement. Then secondly, we may use it's an open question if we should use Kubernetes service or use Istio. Who knows? But
I think really, kind of scrolling down to the very bottom, this notion of the kube proxy. I think what I would kind of parse out is that this proposal is really about improving the way that the particular pod that's chosen to service an incoming request, instead of doing a round-robin load balancing, a big part of this is actually to be more intelligent about picking the specific endpoint that will be selected to service the incoming request. And to really, while topology aware, I get that it's topology aware, but a lot of this seems like it's really more latency aware routing, where you're going to try to find the endpoint that from the source has the shortest latency, either in host, in rack, in cluster, in data center, in region, right? Ultimately, and I haven't had a chance to read through this in detail, but based on what you've described and just kind of skimming through it, it looks like in many cases, you're trying to optimize to get to the shortest path you can to an endpoint that can service that request. And that's ultimately going to be latency-aware routing.
I think that's just one use case of this, just like minimizing your resources is one way you might want to do your scheduling, but there are a lot of other kind of different ways and concerns that people have. I think that this proposal is trying to cover a couple of those cases.
But it doesn't really, I thought the comment that Khaled asked was actually about, would this affect placement? And I thought the answer was no, scheduling of pods and placement of pods still needs to be addressed through the scheduler, through whatever enhancements, et cetera. But then once they're placed, the information about where they're placed will factor into how a particular endpoint is chosen for, say, a load balancer service or a node port service to pick which endpoint to service the incoming request. So the decision about placement and the decision about routing are independent, is what I would have netted out of that.
Or at least it would take a lot more thought to tease out something more complicated.
So, do you more suggest we should do this work in Istio?
Honestly, I'd probably tap someone who is closer to Istio than at least I am. I see the value of it. I know that we have found the work to convert the service routing from an IP table centric way of routing packets to like IPVS. I think the work might have been actually done by Huawei, but the results of that kind of improvement on selecting the route has dramatically impacted the overall performance of the cluster. Istio allows you to control things like the version that you're going to route requests to, and having more intelligent selection about some of the versioning, the tracing, injecting latency, etc. I don't know, though, that I've ever seen anything in Istio that got down to the level of selecting the network route that packets are going to flow to. I mean, I guess to some extent they select an endpoint. Maybe that's part of it. But I think what I understand here is that you're actually saying, look, the way that we actually service a request going through the framework today can be inefficient because it's ultimately going to choose a round robin flow, and it might pick an endpoint that's close, and it might pick an endpoint that's really far away. So let's actually be intelligent about the latency. And this is not unlike CDN networks today, right? I mean, ultimately, if I hit a service in Europe, I'm more likely to get a server returning from DNS that is closer to me than even though the same site hosted in North America. And that's at least the way that it seems like you're proposing it. And then if that's really the case, I could see that being more of a core Kubernetes function than an Istio function.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It still have the mechanism to do the intelligent server routing. For example, the latency and the topology. I can make sure the topology is not supported yet, and the seems it's challenging because it's still it's more focused on the application level. For example,
and I think I'm agreeing with you. I think I'm agreeing with you. I think what I'm trying to say is that I have seen Istio talk about selecting versions, injecting latencies, dealing with failover, etc. I have not seen anything in Istio that says, look, we're going to try to pick the most intelligent route to get to a particular pod to service this request. I have not seen at that layer. So I think I'm agreeing with you. I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but I could see the value of having an improvement in the service layer, the service proxy layer of Kubernetes when it's actually mapping a particular endpoint that's going to service the particular incoming request, and doing so with factors like latency and waiting and responsiveness and things like that, right? I mean, to some extent, what you're saying is Eureka and Consul, which are already generic service registration discovery frameworks, they already have a notion of measuring health, which services do as well for endpoints, but they begin to measure things like latency and reliability and responsiveness. And what you're saying is, look, we should probably go ahead and do that too, all the way down in the services layer, because it'll actually make the entire system more efficient.
Okay.
Is Istio running into, or not able to necessarily like do the topological or any this sort of thing due to any kind of like security concerns or ways that for it to access all this kind of metadata would, since having like a dedicated thing that can have all that information versus if it's next to the application?
I think that's where pieces of Istio, like the Mixer and the Envoy proxy, are trying to abstract some of that authentication and some of that that behavior away. Really, I know we haven't had Spike on in some time, but he would probably be a great person to help clarify that. And honestly, if you haven't already got someone like his feedback, so Spike Curtis, he would probably be able to provide good context in terms of what you're doing versus what is in Istio. And he's also got the deep networking background with Calico. So honestly, I might kind of reach, if you haven't already, reached out to Spike and get feedback from him. That would probably be useful.
So my question is, say Kubernetes already implemented this, right? So then what would like the interaction with Istio looks like?
I think,
will there be like correlation between the Istio policy and the service policy on Kubernetes, or how the integration go?
Firstly, first question is Kubernetes has implemented the host local service. For example, only visit the first service by answer that is in the same host as the Kube proxy, the service proxy. Okay, and the second question is the Istio way. We hope we can integrate with Istio in some day. For example, Istio can directly use our app. Yeah.
My question is how? Like, do you have something in mind? How the integration will go?
For example, Istio will directly use the service policy API, and then do something do its own logical in Istio. So our idea is that Istio is great thing, but it's not mature for now. So we just want to. I was thinking create the API in Kubernetes and then let Istio do their thing, and we don't depend on Istio. We just want to let the Q proceed.
But I think the argument about Istio not being mature, though, may not apply here because you're talking about building capability, which is also itself not necessarily done or mature yet as well. You're introducing new capability like Istio is. I'm going to extrapolate a little bit, but I think, with Howard's question, Howard, let me play out a scenario and tell me if it makes sense. With Istio, I've got an application service. I've got version 1 and version 2. And in the Envoy, I give it, in the Envoy proxy, the sidecar, I give it instructions to say route 100% of requests to the version 1 service. Well, the version 1 service is itself a service resource in Kubernetes with a number of endpoints, with a number of pods. And when I have the client sends a request, it's going to go through the Envoy proxy. It's going to go, at that point, the Envoy proxy will have routing rules to actually say, use the version 1 service. It's going to send it to the version 1 service destination. And I think at that point, kube service would kick into gear, and you'd have, going through the IP tables rules, whatever your network overlay is. And then ultimately, it comes out at one of the pods that's providing the version 1 service, but which pod was selected, Istio didn't have any influence on. And I think the argument that's being made here is that Kubernetes is being inefficient about selecting what ultimate destination receives the packets and returns a response. So you could imagine now that a proposal like this is implemented down at the kube services layer, the service proxy, and then you see a request coming from the client to the Envoy proxy, routing all requests to version 1. But now when it gets down into the service proxy layer, there's some intelligence that says, well, from this particular host, of the 5 endpoints that I know of for this service, the first 2 of those return in 10 milliseconds, and the other 3 return in 40 milliseconds. I'm going to send requests to the first 2 in the endpoint list and let them respond so that I can optimize how long this will take. And so I don't think it's that hard to come up with a scenario where you can see improvements in the underlying routing behavior would still benefit something like Istio. I could still go into Istio and say route 50% of requests to version 1 and 50% of requests to version 2, and then I can still send packets, and the service proxy layer could still make that intelligent judgment. I've got 5 endpoints for service 1 and 5 endpoints for service version 1 and 5 endpoints for version 2, and I can actually say, okay, well, here's the latency of these 5 endpoints for version 1, the latency for version 2 endpoints, and I can actually then make that choice. Istio decides which service endpoint to send it to. This layer, I think, is really about how the network traffic flows from the service destination actually to the endpoint that responds. Am I off the rails here? I mean, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So in that sense, there's going to be something like coordination happening, right? So my further question is like where this coordination will happen. Like is between the Envoy proxy and the service proxy, or between the Istio mixer and the kube service proxy?
Yeah, I mean, Istio, one day Istio can convert the service proxy into native type, and then take it as the part of policies in root rule, because Istio have define their policy in the root rule and has no topology related things. So I kind of.
No, the reason for my question is that typically for open source projects, we could not like presume something that has not been developed now won't be developed in the future, right? So say in the future, there's also similar topology support, being added to Istio, then what is the logical, I understand we are doing things on different layers. I think we need to find out the correlation point so that no matter what the enhancement done at the issue layer, we still know how the flow flows from issue to Kubernetes from L4 to L7, then down to the L3, L4 routing. Do that make sense?
Yeah. I understand. I understand. And yeah, this is just I just mentioned it. I haven't have a clear map, good map about how to let it integrate this with service policy. Yeah.
Okay, Michael, do you have some initial thought on where this correlation might happen?
With the level of detail I have in terms of the lower level networking, which isn't very fine grained, I'd be guessing. I know the work that was done that changed out the kube services proxy to use IPv4 versus IP tables ultimately seems like kind of the same place, right? That same modification within that same region of code, you could actually begin to track latency requests. But I think what you'd actually end up doing is instead of relying on the Linux kernel capabilities for the basic routing, you would actually be recreating an HA proxy or an Nginx or that kind of, or an Envoy. You'd be recreating that level of load balancer support that already has health checking and latency aware routing and things like that built into it. And then I think the question becomes, how much do you try to reinvent, or do you take something like Envoy and just make it the got services proxy layer in Kubernetes so that it can already take advantage of that kind of intelligence that's already got built into it. Okay. And then you're probably in a better state because Nginx and HA proxy and those types of, Envoys may be younger, but it's been battle tested at scale by several folks already, and Lyft clearly and others. But so you'd probably have better luck picking up something that's more mature in that space, because the network in general, right, that's a pretty hard problem. Getting network routing and improving it and optimizing it is non-trivial.
Yeah. Okay, I think we at least we can agree that it would be better for the proposal to include the description, like what the integration between Istio and Kubernetes might look like, right? If we have a clearer picture of how the two, at least options, if not just one possibility, how these two will interact regarding the service policy and topology. Can we agree on that? And have
I definitely agree with you. If you're
do
asking my
further
agreement, I
working on
agree with
that.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, good option. Yeah, but we may should think about it.
Yeah, I think as Michael mentioned, there's definitely a valid reason for the proposal. Like we just discussed, we're working on different layers of things. So, Jundu, if you're still working on this proposal, please hammer out some draft on the architecture options for the issue and Kubernetes integration, and feel free to come back on the policy working group meeting and discuss. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So for the security profile, Isui introduced the idea last week. Do we have like further questions? If people have, spent time on the slide or the design doc. Or Isui, do you have like any update from your side?
Not yet.
Okay. So I propose we can generally keep the scheduling policy, the service topology, and the security profile. The three proposals as our routinely running discussion items for our working group meeting. So these three will be like our anchor to have a better understanding and clearer like picture for the architecture we want to hammer out and provide to the community. Okay. So since we have like 9 minutes left, so I was just showing. So I would suggest, so let's, if we have time, everyone could further do some further readings or some deep analysis on these three proposals.
Just a general question on the security profile. That's basically like the deployment for policies?
It has three parts. So deployment policy, if you call it deployment policy, that's fine. So basically,
deployment.
yeah. The configuration related to the cluster bootstrapping. So will be taken care by the deploy of the cluster. This is one of the part, and it also defines the policies in the cluster scope and also namespace scope. While the namespace scope policy objects will be created dynamically when a namespace is created.
Right. Cool.
Okay, I think let's just all go back and.
I was talking on mute. I did want to ask one quick question.
Yeah.
Is there a reason that the security profile, which is a collection of these different kinds of resources, I guess you're introducing some new resources, right? But ultimately, if you just wanted to collect, here is the type of policy I want created for each namespace, you could actually capture that as something like a Helm chart. And you could deploy that Helm chart, which would configure the resources and apply them to the cluster. I think in this case, what you've also got is some componentry which is triggering behavior based on watching new resources appear in the cluster like new namespaces. Is that correct?
Yeah, so regarding mechanisms, there's a lot of ways you can populate these policy objects into namespace, either manually or automatically. The idea about secure profile is basically provide a creative settings which will make sure the cluster is configured to meet some security standards. So it helps a lot of users of Kubernetes who doesn't have enough knowledge about the command line flags, the policy objects about Kubernetes, and also the domain knowledge about security. So basically, it's an easy wrap for people to use Kubernetes in a much easier way.
So I buy that, right? And I get the value of the aggregation. I think I'm poking at, do you kind of clarify what would be different than using Helm charts to deploy a collection of policies like the profile? And I think what I'm really trying to poke at is you got things in here like bootstrapping rules and other pieces. Is there behavior that responds dynamically to events on the cluster that then triggers, okay, we created a namespace, I'm going to go and set up certain policies in the context of that namespace, or I've seen other objects that trigger now applying, you know, the building block rules that are part of the security profile, applying those to that new thing that was there.
So regarding Helm chart, so first, the Helm chart doesn't cover the bootstrapping part, which is very important in the security profile. It's the biggest part of it. And Helm chart doesn't define like any automated mechanism. You have to write your own hooks or whatever. It basically requires a significant development effort to put things together. So security profile covers the bootstrap part and also a very basic mechanism to populate the names objects. It doesn't cover the policy objects, which is defined for a particular use case, for example, the resource code or something. The goal for security profile is going to define something common that people can directly use.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that's helpful.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, then let's conclude the meeting today. Thanks for everyone's participation, and let's meet again next week. Okay.
All right, thanks everyone. I'll capture the recording and get it posted to the YouTube channel.